All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Lasting Learning Podcast. Today, we've got an amazing guy joining us. This is a guy that I've gotten to know pretty well over the last, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months. It feels like it's been forever, though. I mean, this is a guy that when he comes into your world, he's like family. He's humble. He's hilarious. He is brilliant. And he is just as down home as they come. We got a guy here who is changing the lives of adults and kids everywhere. He's a podcaster, he's a leader, he's a writer, and he's amazing. Today, we've got the incredible Martin Silverman. Marty, thank you so much for joining us today.
Dave, I don't know that I can digest that introduction. That was.
What are you talking about? You sent it to me.
I want to, I want to meet the guy you described. So I'm excited about this as well because I want to meet the man that you just described in that introduction. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. And if you want to meet that guy, just go look in the mirror, man, because it's you. You are incredible. You are a guy that truly I lean into quite a bit. When I need a smile, when I need to pick me up, and when I just need some inspiration and motivation, you are at the top of the list of the people that I turn to. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
No, absolutely. So I've gotten the chance to get to know you quite a bit recently, but there might be some people that are listening to this podcast because, Martin, I don't know if you know this. This is worldwide. This is bigger than the Rich Roll podcast. This is bigger than any podcast out there right now. And it's because people have been waiting for this episode. They've been waiting to get to know you. So can you introduce yourself to all the people around the world listening?
I will be happy to do that, and no pressure at all. So I am Marty Silverman. I am a very long time educator here in beautiful San Antonio, Texas. I am in my 38th year in education, public education, all of those years in Texas, but I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I am definitely a product of the city in the 60s and 70s, which if you know anything about New York during those times were some kind of rough times for New York, but like super exciting times. And so, all of that goes into your background and kind of builds you to who you are. And so, very, very appreciative of having grown up in Brooklyn. I'm the youngest of 4 children. My parents were first generation Americans. They were the first of their families that were born here. Neither of them with very much formal education, hard workers. My mother was a union worker, worked for the city of New York, for the city of New York Police Department. And my dad worked in the garment district in Manhattan in a factory. And so, that kind of upbringing. Little known fact, although I've probably told this story before, I was the first. This is, when you try to put your age on things, I was the first class of kids that went to Head Start and pre-K in New York City when that was established back in 1966. And we were living in a housing project in Brooklyn, and they wanted us poor kids to go to get a leg up, and so I was a pre-K student. Then I went to college in upstate New York in a place called Oswego, New York, the State University of New York. I call it the Harvard of the Great Lakes. A great place to go to school, and met some great people. And just on a whim, I took a teaching position in Houston after I graduated with my degree in education, and ended up in Texas, sight unseen. The day I moved to Texas was the day I first saw Texas. And so that was all done, like distance interviews and a contract through the mail. And so moved down to Houston, taught there for 3 years, and then slid over here to San Antonio, a couple hundred miles west, and here I am. I was a elementary school teacher. I taught first grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. I was a bilingual teacher, taught in Spanish for a whole year in Houston, and then became an administrator. And this is my 31st year in school administration. And here we sit, Dave, after all of that experience.
So let me just sum all of that up really quickly, because I think it's what you just described is super powerful for people to really recognize. You start off saying you've been in education for 38 years, you've been in administration for 31 years. When I asked you to introduce yourself, you didn't necessarily go through the entire professional journey that you've been on. You went back to being born and raised in New York, a product of the projects of Brooklyn, from one project's child to another, man. I feel you. Um, why is that the piece of your life that you continue to resonate with? When I say introduce yourself, you go back to Brooklyn, a place that's a couple of thousand miles away from where you are right now, a place that is, I mean, it's a little bit different than San Antonio. You know, the people are different, the geography is different, the politics and the culture are so different, but yet it's still a part of you, even 4 decades later. I mean, more than 4 decades later, right? So why is that the piece that you wanted to lead with in your introduction?
Well, because you asked about me, and we are a product of our human selves. Not what we do is secondary to who we are, in my opinion. And so, that is the basis of when you ask me who I am, I'm the product of that. And what I do is in turn then a product of who I am. So I feel like all of those pieces are what makes me who I am. And so the educator part, of course, is huge. I mean, it's been most of my life, but that's not the essence of who I am. The essence of who I am is who I am.
Mm, good stuff right there. And I think that lends itself into your professional journey as well, because people that are listening, and maybe not watching, they're just listening to this, they're picking up on the fact that you are a male educator, right?
Yeah.
A male educator that spent most of your teaching career teaching little learners, those kiddos that were in the single digits for their age, which back at the time when you were in the classroom, I'm sure was a novelty, because that's a novelty even today for these little learners to experience having a male teacher, pushing them, guiding them, mentoring them, teaching them. Did you feel like you were an anomaly back then? Because today you are an anomaly for a lot of reasons. A, just because your passion and your calm nature and your amazingness, let alone the fact that you've been in administration for 31 years and educator for 38 years, which we're going to tackle that in a second. But time in the classroom as a male elementary educator, did you feel like you were the odd duckling, if you will?
I did and I didn't. I worked in Houston in a really unusual time. Well, and I want to go back a little bit. So when I student taught in upstate New York, I student taught in Oswego, New York, and in a town called Fulton, New York. And in Fulton, New York, I student taught first grade. That was my first student teaching experience. And then in New York, they required you to do 2 placements. And my second placement was actually in an elementary self-contained 6th grade in Oswego, where there was a male teacher. And typically, if there was a male teacher in elementary, it was in the upper grades. It was a 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade teacher. But that first experience, having connected with the first graders in student teaching, was powerful because I don't know if, and I know you've worked with elementary kids too. Elementary, and especially early elementary, there is what you see in growth from beginning of year to end of year is just, I mean, it's incredible. I have been able to tell the story. I can say, like, I can actually say that I taught somebody how to read. Somebody who didn't know how to read knew how to read after I worked with them. I mean, that is, I just can't even imagine the power that is, for that kid's life and just in general. And so I was drawn to the little kids. But I was starting to say, when I was in Houston, there was actually, in the school that I worked in, another male first grade teacher, and there were 2 male second grade teachers, which was extraordinarily unusual. It just so, I didn't know how unusual it was until I had, went to other schools. But I felt drawn to that age of student. And when I started, Dave, I was 21, and I would go home exhausted every day because first graders take a lot out of you. And we'll talk about the history of like when I started teaching to now, it's just changed so much. But first graders, want to connect. The energy that they both give and deplete from you is amazing. And so that was because I was more connected, I think, to them than specifically to a content area, which I felt like teachers, I did teach fourth and fifth grade later, and there was more of a with older elementary and I'm sure in secondary, there's more of a connection to the content with the teacher than just like who the kids are. But I felt the connection to the people part of them. And so those little kids, it was like a real natural fit for me and them. And yeah, I mean, I'm 6'4", Dave. And so, picture me walking a group of first graders around. It was that was also, I'm sure, a pretty comical sight.
So a lot of what you just said right now resonates with me for a lot of reasons. Number one, I still have 3 elementary kids in my household right now. And I can only wish that they, at some point in their educational journey, get to experience an educator like you, somebody that really does focus in on the priorities. I talk a lot about focusing on the focus. And I think that that is something that is a unique gift of yours, is that when you look at the hearts of kids, that's exactly what you see. You don't necessarily see points on a data chart. You don't see quantifiable evidence of mastery or learning. You see a child with a unlimited potential and a destiny that's still to be shaped and formed, because that's what you've experienced throughout your life, is you've seen the twists and the turns of life that have gotten you to this place today that I guarantee 38 years ago you would have never predicted.
Yeah.
But here you are out there inspiring the next generation, inspiring the next generation of little learners and the next generation of educators. It's interesting. The average teacher today, when they enter the profession, they stick around for 4.2 years. 4.2 years.
Wow.
You've been around for 38 years. Why? Why are you still holding on, Marty?
Well, clearly, with you giving that statistic, I feel like I'm my one of my purposes is to mess up the curve.
If you weren't here, it would be like 2.6 years,
yeah,
right?
no, exactly. I have to be the dot, the outlier dot on that chart somewhere. This is what I really want to do. And so, it's funny that you say that, because that question, when it's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. And so I was not, you hear stories about people who got into education because of, it was the family business. I had parents that were educators, or I had a lot of connection with educators, and I did not in the family. And I have a great story about how I became a teacher. I'll give you a couple of pieces of that. But I'm the youngest of 4, right? I have 3 older sisters. And so there is a story that goes around in my family that when I was, and my sisters are 3, 5, and 7 years older than me. So they loved every bit of school. And so when they would go to school, here's the first part of the story is they would go to school and they would come home, and this was when I was, preschool, and they would come home and play school. And me being the youngest captive, I was forced to play school. And I'm going to tell you that my sisters, I believe, I don't remember the process, but I think they taught me how to read. Because I'll tell you a story in a minute about when I started school. But also they tell a story about when I was a baby. They used my crib with me in it. It was the principal's office when they so there is always, I say, talk about destiny. That was that was clearly my destiny. It was imprinted on me from the crib. But so I told you I went to Head Start, right?
Yeah.
I went to pre-K in Brooklyn, and then I went to kindergarten, and about not quite mid-year of kindergarten, I don't know how the process went, but my kindergarten teacher moved me to first grade. So I skipped a grade. I was in kindergarten for part of the year, and then I was in first grade the rest of that year. And I credit that all with I had a bunch of input. I mentioned before that my parents were not school educated, but they were huge readers. Newspapers and books. There were books all over the house because that was something that was interesting to them. Lots of music, played, lots of that kind of thing. But we didn't have a TV. We watched TV constantly, like most 60s and 70s kids. But we didn't have a TV in the living room. TVs were in the bedroom, which I think is unusual, maybe in some families. And so we didn't sit and watch TV together. But when we were together in the living room, or at meal times, you would see in the living room were books and things like that. So it was, I think, imprinted that way. And so I went to college not ever intending to be a teacher. But when I say that, I say not intending, but I think it was in the back of my mind, because I went to school and I was a speech communications major in college. And I have this story about how I mean, it's a story, but it's a true story. So we had to pre-register for communications classes, and by going to, this was before, clearly before online registration. I was in college from 79 to 83. And so we would go to this place and we would have to go pre-register for classes. Well, I went to that place and I was so excited. It was probably about junior year, and I was going to be like one of the first to get pre-registered for these classes. And literally, Dave, I don't know what came over me. I walked out of the line right as they opened the doors to pre-register. I walked out of the line. I went over to the education department and changed my major. Like, I still can't tell you what caused that to happen. But for the last 2 years, that's when I became an elementary education major. I started taking 19 and 21 credit hours a semester so I could still graduate on time, and did it. So even though it's almost like it chose me, but I think it chose me because of all of the input that had been given to me that really made me want to become an educator.
So cool. And so 1983, I'm going to call out some things. I feel like I've been in education for a while because I started teaching prior to No Child Left Behind. And when I say that to some people, like, oh my gosh, there was a time before No Child Left Behind. You started teaching back before A Nation at Risk was published. So I mean, that came out like in 1983, and that's really what changed the game of education. And I say it's actually what created the game of education in America. It didn't change it. It created the game of education in America. It's where we started comparing ourselves to anybody and everybody, where the charts started coming out and we were behind all of these other developing countries. And it changed the way that education was done in America. It's when the Iowa Basic Skills Test started coming into force back in the 80s. It's where the states then said, okay, we need to start competing with each other. And then No Child Left Behind came in 2000, 2001. And then we had Race to the Top come in, and then we had a pandemic. And Marty, you've been an educator through it all. Talk to me, number one, about what it's been like to see this evolution, de-evolution, whatever you want to call it, of education throughout the last 38 years. And then I'm going to go back to that question again. Why are you still doing it?
Yeah, I didn't answer that yet. But that's a great question, because my first 2 years in teaching in the state of Texas were before what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's really in I want to say it's the 85, 86 school year is when state testing was introduced at all into our state. So prior to that, and also, so my first 2 years I was teaching first grade, and I'll paint a picture for teachers. This was pre class size limits, pre teachers having conference periods, prep periods, pre that. So picture this: my first year I have 31 first graders. I have no conference period. There's like no off period, and we have to eat lunch with our kids. There's no duty-free lunch either. So 31. So when I told you I was 21 and exhausted, it was also because I was never away from.
But back then, teachers were making $600,000 a year, right?
My first 16.5, and I thought I was
wow.
I thought I was banking it. So I had 31 kids, first graders, no conference period, no duty-free lunch. Second year, my school loses enrollment and I moved to a different school. I have 34 first graders. Forget this, 18 boys, 16 girls. I always remember my lines going on, forever. no conference period, no duty-free lunch. And so then all of a sudden, the state decided, the thing you left out too was they also decided that teachers needed to show competence. And so that's also when certification exams began. But Texas went back and re-examined all the teachers that were currently there, and it was a fiasco. If you, well, let's say if you remember, you were in diapers probably then. But you, so you
no. I was watching He-Man and the Jetsons and all those sorts of things. So yeah.
Okay. So, but they went back and also decided that we needed to make sure that our teachers were competent. And so that's when, when I got certified in Texas certification up until I think it was 1999, you got a life certification, and you initially got a life certification just by having the coursework and being done. All I needed to switch my New York certification to Texas was I had to take a course in Texas government at the college level, at the community college level when I got here, and then I'm certified for life. Wow. And then eventually when I added my ESL and my administrative, we had to take a test to do that. But again, it was for life. So the quality of teachers' expectation also changed then. And so over time, the testing, as we've talked about, if not just you and I, but just in general, and certainly I've heard you speak about that, has become the driving force when it was not when I began. When I began, there was some weird stuff like, the expectation was for first graders that every first grader in the city of Houston was supposed to be in the same place, in the same book at the same time. There was no consideration of a differentiation of learning, by style or by level or background abilities and things like that being brought into play. So there was an expectation. The other side of that was actually good was there was actually an expectation that all kids were going to be at the same level at the same time. So we had to use some ingenuity to try to get our kids to reach. And so I feel like we were given a lot of latitude to do that. But once the testing kind of artificially took the place of just having high expectations, the testing actually put, in my opinion, some lower expectations, which then became, you talked about it being the game. I think you used the words the game. That became the game. The game was all you have to do is get them to this level, right? And this level was initially not very high at all. So whereas before we may have naturally thought our kids could do better than something, the ceiling was really lowered for us when testing came in. And so over time, what I've seen is now we lament the fact that our kids, we don't push, we don't reach for the top, we don't look for mastery, we don't, because all they have to do is get to a certain level on testing, and that's probably the biggest change over time.
That it's super insightful to hear that, is just especially as you reflect on the transition that's happened over 38 years, because I think there's a lot of people out there that would think that over the last 4 decades, the expectations have increased, that we have increased the level of rigor, or that the standards have pushed students to this new level. But as I'm hearing you say that, I'm reflecting on conversations I've had with literally hundreds of other educators. When we start talking standards-based instruction and mastery and competency-based instruction, there's this feeling or this belief with so many educators and so many people in society today that learning is this got it, don't got it mentality, that it's binary, that it's just, we just had to get the kids to quote unquote get it. And then once a kid gets it, honestly, that is the biggest question that I get is, what do I do with them now? They've already met the standard, they've already met mastery, now what? But hearing you go back in this reflective journey over the last few decades, that didn't necessarily used to be the case. You were naturally inclined to reach each student on your journey to try to reach every student. So that's powerful. That's interesting.
Dave, one of the things that's interesting about that is, and part of, and I'm going to use your words again, the game of this is when you look at what constitutes, because you're right, the standards, we don't use Common Core, but we use our own.
Everything is different in Texas. We got that. Yeah,
yeah. We use the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, the TEKS, and the TEKS for each grade level are actually higher expectation probably than was 38 years ago. But I will say this, well, because we didn't have them before, 38 years ago we didn't have them, and then we had something put in place. They were called essential elements, and then it grew these TEKS here in Texas. But if you look at what constitutes passing, and I'm going to use that word passing on a state test. Okay, so yes, the TEKS are a lot and high, high expectation, but some of our state tests, in order to get approaches grade level, which is considered passing, you only have to get like 38% on the test. The reading tests are in the 50s. If you get like in the 50s, you're approaching grade level. So look at the artificiality of that. Like we have a high stakes test, but I'll tell my teachers, if you think about this, every kid could get an F, and we'd have 100% passing. And so that does, that artificial sense of raising standards, I think, is a lot of the place where we've gone wrong in considering education. But it's less from us as educators as has been imposed. But what has been imposed has raised us. Plus, this generation of educators have gone through that system. Yeah. And so that's what they're also used to.
So before we started recording, we were just talking a little bit, and I said that I don't use scripts when I record these episodes because sometimes the conversation takes a right turn. I want to be able to go there, or a left turn. And I'm gonna be very honest with you right now. I'm trying my best not to geek out and start talking about all this assessment stuff right now. I am biting my tongue and chomping at the bit to go there, but I want to avoid it and instead ask a question that I don't know the answer to, because I feel like I'm tempted to just geek out and start talking about percentages and standards and all that. But instead, a guy who got into education for the right reasons, who continues to teach kids for the right reasons. When you see that the game of schools are really revolve around tests, but yet you don't necessarily live your life chasing test scores. You don't necessarily push teachers to chase test scores. You don't push kids to teach test scores. How do you allow the educators that you work with and the students that you mentor and guide, how do you allow them to still feel successful, to feel aligned, to feel purposeful, and yet still find success on what everybody else is measuring them on?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I don't want to give you the impression that we don't consider test scores and
sure.
the test.
Nope.
We're getting ready. This coming week is state testing week. So
yeah.
It is, it's extraordinarily important because it is how people outside of us evaluate us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's very important. And also, to be fair, I would not want to limit the opportunities for my students by saying, oh, you know what, test scores don't matter, it doesn't matter what you do, because it does matter what they do. Mm-hmm. It does matter what they do. So we do, we are very serious about kids doing well on tests. But I will say it doesn't end there. And my belief and my practice and my experience has been that when you fill them with those other pieces that are important to raising them as great human beings, they also tend to do well on tests. And you've heard that said probably a million times. And you said, I was listening to something you talked about being a turnaround principle, right? That the key is not what doesn't turn a school around is artificially raising scores for a year by using some great test prep materials that will get the scores up. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you use that initial feeling of making kids feel successful on something that you can control, which then builds that in them. and they say, you know, I can do this. The testing, it's not, you know, I can handle that. And so once they feel that they can handle that, and they also then develop other skills and other, you know, competencies, that the testing does become secondary. That doesn't become the focus. So what I've seen in schools, in some schools, is when the test becomes the focus, you know, and that's all there is, a school may appear to be successful, but it's not a strong basis of, you know, like building on that. It's very easily destroyed because all you have to do is change the test or change the passing standard, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden a great, and I'm putting it in air quotes, right, a great school becomes an ordinary school.
Yeah.
And so, um, so what goes into that is if we create an environment at school where kids want to come and kids want to, you know, kids know that we're here to make their experience great, and their experience not just academically but socially, and we want to, you know, key into showing you some interest that you may not know that you have, and giving you experiences rather than extrinsic reward all the time, you know, but giving you the reward of, we're going to, you know, provide you the opportunity to do you know, give you privileges, give you activities, you know, provide clubs and organizations and things like that, like my student podcast, right? That I'm sure we'll talk about, and maybe even
Yeah.
more a little later. But like giving you the opportunity to try something that you may not know that you even wanted to do or had, you know, had the ability to do, and then building that confidence and connection to the school. They're going to do that. They're going to also enthusiastically move that over to the academics, which is our goal one. It really is goal one.
It's such a powerful answer. And as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, you know, if I were to take this episode and decide to write a biography about you, I feel like that answer gave me the title for your biography. I would call it Marty Silverman, A Life Beyond Expectations. Because I feel like that's what you've described in every single answer so far to every question is, there's a standard, but let's move beyond it. There's a level that people expect, but let's go beyond it. You live a life of ands, not ors. I feel like you are always looking for the next thing to build upon, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life. And you mentioned professionally, you've got a couple of podcasts going right now. You're writing all the time right now. There are people listening to this that would say, but Marty, you've been playing this game for 38 years. This is the time to just sit back, man. Just sit back and coast. Let things happen. Why are you continuing to do things beyond expectations even now?
You know, that's a great question. And a lot of that has come, a lot of it is place in life, right? So, you know, my kids are grown, my grandkids are babies. The ones that, you know, yeah, I mean, I have a 2-week-old grandkid, about a 7-month-old and a 18-month-old. And so there's, number one, there's time, because I'll use you as an example. You know, you have elementary age kids who demand a lot of time and energy and should, and that's you know, where your focus a lot of the time has to be, and mine can be on school. So, you know, on those kinds of things, I have time to podcast, and I have time to maybe write a blog post or two, because I'm not still going to baseball practice and soccer practice and picking up kids from all over the place. So there is that. But I will say this, it's also over time, you see in yourself and in other people what has moved people along the path of, like, wanting to get up and your feet hit the floor, and you're like happy to get ready and happy to go to work. And, you know, I have never, and this has been always true, like I never wanted to go to work and be miserable, because I was going to be spending so much time there. And so a lot of it has been both successfully and not successfully, because I can tell you some downsides to what you described, the life of expectations. There's some downsides to that too, because also sometimes people don't meet those expectations, and situations don't meet those expectations, and so that, you know, that happens too. but for the most part, I still get up in year 38 and say, I'm looking forward to my 30 and a half mile drive to school and seeing my people and hanging with the kids and, you know, doing the things that I do. And that is still, you know, something that motivates me and inspires me and makes me happy. So, you know, I could very well be happy sitting on the couch. I really probably could. Slothful is not against my nature, but I fight against that. But yeah, I mean, when it the cliche, when it feels like I don't want to get up and go to work anymore, that may be the time.
I also feel like you create your opportunities as well, because you do talk about being slothful could feel, I mean, could feel good, and it could also feel natural. I mean, I feel that way an awful lot, where I feel like I could just settle in and I could just enjoy a nice iced tea or cocktail on the back deck, just watching the birds fly by. That would be the good life. And I've had some career opportunities that at times have made me feel like, okay, it is time to just shut it down and move on out. But in those moments, I've always said, no, I'm going to make this job the best it can be. I'm going to find the passions within the work. And
Absolutely.
and you are in a position right now as well, where tons of expectations, tons of pressures. At times you talk about testing week coming up this coming week, and the kids are going to be stressed out. The teachers you work with are going to be stressed out. You're going to be stressed out, but yet you're still
I will
finding.
not be stressed out, Dave. Because you know what? Because this isn't, and this is not cliche. If we've done what we're supposed to do, this is not a stressful week.
Oh, good for you.
This is not a stressful week.
Oh,
This
so
is
good.
just now getting it done.
But to that point, some of the things that you are doing to get it done involve, again, that beyond expectations approach. You mentioned the podcast that you're doing with your students, for example. Can you talk about that really quickly? Because I think this is super cool, and I've loved listening to this so far. Can you inform the listeners out there what this is that you're doing and why?
No, I'm so excited about it too. So we have 3 episodes of our podcast called This Ranger Life. My school, Salinas Elementary, we're the Rangers. And so, you know, I'm an NPR nerd, and This American Life. And so it became, excuse me, This Ranger Life. And I am a generator of ideas. I'm a big idea guy. I'm a big, big picture guy. And then sometimes getting somebody to help me with all the little details that, they snap out of my head, like, let's do this, let's try this, let's do this. And then I need somebody to work with me. So I have this phenomenal teacher who offered to help do some of the kid wrangling and all of that. But we started, based on the fact that I've been doing my little podcast since December, the second question, we were talking about, and this teacher will come and talk to me about having listened in the episodes. And I said, it would be so cool to do one with kids. And actually, the initial inspiration for that was Ray Porton's Boys podcast, which I listened to, and I thought, I just love that they get the opportunity to give their perspective. And about 2 weeks ago, I got to be a guest on there and hang out with Ray and Leo and do that podcast. And it was so cool. And I was like, we got to do this at school. We got to get some kids and see if we have kids that would be both like willing and get something out of doing this podcast. So I had 6 kids, 4th and 5th graders, who are like the This Ranger Life crew, as they call themselves now. And we meet a couple of days a week. Right at the last about 45 minutes of the day, they come out of class, and the teacher and I help them have what we call production meetings, where we'll put together, like, this is Teacher Appreciation Week. We just finished recording. Next week is Armed Forces Week. And San Antonio is a big military town, and so we're doing some armed forces stuff. And in the first episode, I kind of led it. I talked them through it. But in the second and third episode, it's the only voices you hear are the kids, and then the adults that they do some interviews. And so now the next thing is, I showed one of the kids in Audacity. We'll record the pieces in Audacity, and I'll tell them, okay, so now I've done it. Now you sit here, and I want you to do it. Like, you record and I'll stand behind you and you record this interview, and then we'll look at how edit, and I'm gonna teach them how to edit it. And so, my goal is that ultimately we'll be there watching them, but they'll be able to do all of the pieces. And it's also because PR for a school, if you don't tell your story, somebody else will. This is another way for like the voices then of the kids to come out and us be able to kind of direct the story of what we want, our school to be seen as. And so, yeah, it's been so much fun. It's been a great experience, and I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate you sharing it.
Well, it's so cool. Just the idea that you have to amplify, not only amplify student voices and student ideas, but truly to empower these little people to go out and make big people decisions and to do the things that they're seeing other adults do. We talk all the time about preparing kids for their future, and we forget that they're living their lives right now. This is their future. This is their reality. This is what matters to them. And you are empowering them and giving them that opportunity right now. And man, I commend you so much for this. It's such a cool activity.
And it's a total joy. It really is. It's so much fun. And you just hit on a very important point in that casual response, which was as we're building their future and building and empowering them. One of the things we forget is we do too much for them in almost every aspect. So, one of the other things when you want to talk about, I'm gonna go back to a question when we talked about what was different when I started and what's different now, is parents started doing everything for their kids. And I'll even go into things like youth sports. Like kids used to just play, and when you had a disagreement, you figured it out. And if you were playing football in a neighborhood and somebody stepped out of bounds, and there was not an adult there to say, yep, blow a whistle. And we didn't have youth soccer at 3 and kids in all these organized things where we have taught them that adults need to intervene in everything. That you are not. I feel like the message we send is you're not capable of figuring this out yourself, so we're going to do it for you. And so we debilitated a couple, I think now, of generations maybe of kids they look to us to arbitrate everything and do everything for them. And so one of the probably my biggest goal at that school is to take that away. So a lot of this is pre-COVID, when we could do, when we had a lot more freedom within the building without regulations. But like I told my fifth graders, we're not going to walk you to specials anymore. Just go. Like we expect you to know how to manage yourself in the hallways. So just do it. In the cafeteria, sit wherever you want. You don't have to sit by class. You don't have to sit, with in certain spots. Sit wherever you want. It's your responsibility. Figure it out. I used to take them to recess, the fifth graders and the third graders, after lunch. That was just something I enjoyed doing because it was a good way to also get to know them. But I would tell them, I'm one and there's 120 of you, but we're going to go. And as long as you figure out how to, manage yourselves, this will be successful. And if not, then we won't, but like to expect them to be able to we don't expect them to be able to do things in elementary school. And therefore we don't allow them to, and therefore they don't build capacity. And so I have this great video and I'm going to share it with you, Dave. We have tetherball. So this is Texas where we can still play tetherball, right? And we have a tetherball court, that's under a tree. And a couple of years ago, the tetherball got wrapped up in a branch in the tree. And so the kids initially looked to me like, what are we going to do? And my response is always, what are you going to do? Because I'm old and fat and I'm not going to climb that tree and get your tetherball down. So that's not going to happen. So what are you going to do? And I have a video. I just stepped back, but when they started problem solving and planning, and there's kids lifting, figuring it out, lifting a couple of kids up like over themselves so that they could unwrap the tetherball out of the tree. And then the cheer that rang up when they did it, to me, that's goals, to teach kids to be able to do that. Because when you can do that, and you can do it without an adult, doing it for you, being there as kind of like a guide, but not doing it for you, that's where you build capacity. And to me, that's everything. That if that make that the title of the book.
No, but seriously, I think people listening right now heard you say multiple times in that answer. And when you go back and listen to this, Marty, you're going to hear yourself talking about beyond those expectations again. That's the essence of it. That some people would see what you're doing and you'd say, oh, you don't have expectations for those kids. You're going to go just let them figure it out. And it's the exact opposite. It's because you have expectations for those kids and you know that they can far surpass what they've been allowed to do or afforded the opportunities to do. That's why they will succeed. That's why they will figure out a way.
So that's exactly now I was going to tell you the other side of that. I told you there's also some bad part to that, because sometimes they don't. Sometimes people don't. And so it's funny that you say that, because we recently have had some conversations in school, because that's also my leadership style with the staff, is not to micromanage you. It's to tell you, this is what needs to happen. And guess what? Sometimes people don't reach those expectations. And it's disappointing. And I have been tempted, just exactly what you said. People say, well, you don't expect them to do whatever, like add that, but it's so not that. I expect you to do it. I expect people to do it without, a whip, and without, a cookie, and without, you should do things. You should build that capacity. And that's what builds capacity in people, in adults and kids. And so when you're expected to do something and you do it and you feel the confidence of, I did it without, I did it from my own right. And it wasn't because I did it because I was going to win something, or I did it because I was going to get something, or I did it because if I don't do it, this bad thing is going to happen to me. That's the goal.
I feel like so much of what you said, we jokingly at the very beginning of this, you made the joke about you had to be that outlier. You had to be outside of the norm. And you really are in all phases of what you do. Not just the fact that, again, I keep throwing this number out there, not even just the fact that you've been educating for 38 years, which is crazy. But I think one of the reasons you've been successful for 38 years, where the norm lasts less than 5, is because the norm is not necessarily the best place to be. I spend a lot of my days and a lot of my time doing research and diving into academia. And I know the best studies are those studies that explore the outliers. Anybody can go out and look at the average and say, what's everybody else doing? But if we want to change the average, if we want to change that curve, you got to study the outlier. So I'm so glad that we're able to study you and your life and your journey, your experiences and your expertise, because truly you are surpassing all expectations. And I already thought you were pretty amazing 15 minutes ago when we first started talking. So now you're way off the charts, my friend, way off the charts. And I so appreciate it. So good. So I'm curious though, with all of this wisdom and all of this stuff that you have shared with us, from Brooklyn to Houston to San Antonio, 30-mile drives, kids podcasts, all the things that are happening right now with you personally, professionally, all of the things that you are still trying to innovate and create and inspire and empower. If you had to leave the billions of people that are listening to you right now with one thing, imagine you're standing on a stage right now, mic in hand, they're all listening to the great Marty Silverman right now, and they're hanging on your every word right now. What is the thing that you want to impart with them before you drop that mic and walk off the stage? No pressure. Speaking of no pressure, there's no pressure with testing me, but there's pressure right now.
I feel no pressure, to come up with a fabulous quote. But I think the idea of being a whole Dave. Okay, because I do want to word this right. I want people to, number one, enjoy, like, if you hate what you do, then find something to do that you don't hate. But also find something you love about what you do so that you can learn to love it. There's also that, running away is not always the answer to. Sometimes you persevere and you figure out what the good part is, and then you do that. So that's one of the things. But also, I'm going to echo your words, because you helped me with that, was go beyond your own expectations and maybe the expectations that people have of you and the people that are around you. Um, so definitely, raise the ceiling on yourself. That's me. That's exactly me, because I'm an ordinary, I really am. I'm just an ordinary guy. And but I have found, like, hey, I can write a blog, like, hey, I can do a podcast. Hey, I can um uh, help kids do, some things that they didn't think that they could do. And so those for some people, very ordinary, because, like, I'm in awe of people like you. And so it's just funny that the ordinary, I guess, can be extraordinary. Does that make sense? So maybe the mic drop moment is, find the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Well, that's good. That is good, good, good. And I'm going to wrap it up with that. Right now it feels like in the world and in education, there's a lot of commodities out there. Everybody's got podcasts, everybody's got books, everybody wants their story to be told. But your story, and I'm saying this to you, Marty, and I'm saying this to the people listening right now, your story is not a commodity. Your story is not ordinary. Embrace that extraordinary that is in you. Embrace the extraordinary. Go out there, change the world, and surpass all expectations. Marty, you are absolutely incredible. There are people listening right now that want to continue this journey with you. They want to track all that you're doing, because I guarantee this is the first of many, many, many big things that are happening from you. I can't wait to start reading more of your words, hearing more of your words, and people that want to track this journey with you. How can they stay connected with you?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I would love that. And of course, social media. I'm on Facebook as just myself, Martin Silverman. Twitter at Mr. Silverman 116. On Voxer, on Instagram, but Instagram is almost all food pictures. Another one of my hobbies, and that's kind of where that goes. Um, uh, you know, Email, if people just had questions, that email is good, and I'll give you that information so you can put it in show notes. And this opportunity it's just nice to be look up Salinas Elementary, listen to This Ranger Life, or the Second Question podcast, and now the Texan Connection podcast, the newest one that I'm involved in. So definitely, I'm always happy to connect with other people.
That's awesome. So listeners, go out there and be extraordinary and actually read the show notes and collect and connect with this amazing man. Your life will be enhanced as a result of it. Marty, thank you so much. Thanks for going above and beyond, taking time out of your schedule today to inspire and empower me and all the listeners to this episode.
Well, Dave, thank you so much, and I appreciate, as you know, I hope I tell you, I appreciate you and your friendship, and thank you for having me today. I really do appreciate it.